It is an absolute blessing to be with you here at this first Alaska Right to Life convention. And how many of you, when you walked in the room, were a little bit disappointed there weren't more people here? To be honest, let's be fair. Okay. You know what? Let me tell you a story, because this really underscores what God can do from very little things. Last night at the Valentine's dinner, I shared some of the stories of 40 Days for Life and how it began. And this evening at the send-off, I'll share a few other stories along those lines. But one story I don't tell very often is our concluding event for the first ever 40 Days for Life. So we had this campaign that we started from an hour of prayer, and we had over 1,000 people participate throughout the 40 days, and we were ramping up to a grand finale. And we were going to have our closing rally on the Texas A&M campus, not far from where we'd held our prayer vigil during the 40 days. And just to show you how audacious my faith was at the time, we rented out an entire field. We thought people would come from across the state. We thought the 1,000 people who would participate in the campaign would all come, and we promoted it. We put a full-page ad in the newspaper. We spread the word, and we got there, and about 36 people showed up. That was the end of the first ever 40 Days for Life campaign. And I have to be honest, seeing about 36 people in a field that could hold several thousand people looked pretty dismal. And I was pretty discouraged. And I was sitting there just kind of beating myself up. Well, I thought this 40 days thing was such a great idea. I thought this had so much potential, and I thought we'd end on this high note, and instead, look at how it ended. But if it hadn't been for that first campaign, which ended on what we perceived to be not that exciting of an end, not that well attended, but some of those people who were there were instrumental in 40 days beginning to spread to other cities, and then helping to form the first national 40 Days for Life campaign. And to date, over 500,000 people have participated in 40 Days for Life campaigns. But it all had to go through that one humble moment of realizing it's not the number of people, it's the commitment of the people who are there and what they are willing to do. And so we don't need to look around at the chairs and say who's not here. We need to say who is here and what kind of an impact can we, with God's help, have on the world. And the thing that differentiates what will happen moving forward from here in a 40 Days for Life campaign, in Alaska Right to Life, in personhood efforts, in efforts to educate people about the value of every single person conceived, whatever the circumstances of their conception, the one thing that will differentiate success and failure rises and falls on leadership. And so, yes, I'm going to use 40 Days for Life as the context for this, but my hope during this session is to help you to understand how important leadership is, but more importantly, to help you to understand that you, congratulations, you are a leader. In any definition that you read of leadership, it inevitably comes back down to one word, and that word is influence. Our ability to influence others. Now, you may not have ever thought about this before, but right now, today, in your life up to this moment of us coming together at the Alaska Right to Life Convention, you are a leader in the pro-life movement, for better or in some cases, for worse. You are a leader based upon the words you say which influence other people, and regrettably, sometimes we lead other people through our silence. Because they say, well, you seem to think abortion is this real critical issue, and yet you don't talk about it. You don't articulate the defense of the one. You don't articulate why every life is worthwhile. Maybe it's really not that big of a deal. That's leading, for worse. We lead people through our actions. What you do speaks so loudly that what you say I cannot hear. People are watching what we do, and regrettably, at times they watch what all of us fail to do. And through our inaction, through our apathy, they make judgments about how serious we are about this crisis we face. So you are already a leader. And my hope during this time is to help you to understand not only that you are a leader, but to help you to become a more effective leader. Because what will fill the rest of the chairs next year, what will have cities and towns across Alaska on fire for life, what will ultimately result in bringing about the end of abortion in this state, second only to the move of God Almighty, will be you and I recognizing our call to leadership. And so the first things, before we even talk about building a team and leading other people, we have to understand that it's an attitude, first and foremost, and we have to instill within ourselves what it means to be a leader and why we must be a leader. And there are three things I want to start with to help you understand this. And the first of these are very simple. Number one is a recognition that I am called to lead. Okay, will you repeat after me, please? I am called to lead. That didn't convince me. All right, pretend for a second that we are at a hockey game, and it's your favorite team that's about to go out onto the ice. Get as excited about what you're about to say as you would if you were cheering for that hockey team. Can we do that? All right, repeat after me, please. I am called to lead. There you go. You were getting into it. Thank you. I appreciate that. There you go. You are called to lead. Now, when you look throughout history at all of the greatest moves of the Holy Spirit in our world, when you look at the greatest social reformations that have ever happened in the time of man, inevitably you will look at one or a few people who recognize they had been given a call by God to lead in their sphere of influence. One of my favorite stories of this is one that's not taught in our schools, but it's a profound story. In 1837, a young attorney was invited by some friends to go from his town to another town about 6 miles east to go to a revival type meeting in a church. And the church was called the Salem Church. And his friends invited him, and he wasn't a real religious guy, but he said, I've got nothing else going on, so he agreed to go along. And that night he got in the wagon and went on this ride over to this other town, to the Salem Church. And when they arrived there, the church was packed with people. And the reason it was packed was because the Reverend Peter Akers was preaching that night. And throughout that region, Reverend Akers was known as this gifted Bible preacher. And that night, his message was on the dominion of Jesus Christ. Now, in his message, he shared that he believed the dominion of Christ could not come in America until America abolished her sin of slavery. And he shared in his message that he believed that regrettably the only way that this would happen would be through a bitter and divisive civil war, but that ultimately America would make it through that, would heal, and would eventually completely abolish slavery for once and for all. Now, as Reverend Akers was building his case and laying out this message, his voice rose right at the end of his sermon, and he called out to everyone assembled before him, and he said, who can tell, but perhaps the very man that God may use to lead us through this strife may be here in this very presence tonight. And if you haven't figured it out by now, that young attorney who was in the room about 20 yards away from Reverend Akers was a young Abraham Lincoln. That night on the wagon ride home, Lincoln was silent, didn't even talk to his friends. The next morning, he went into his law practice. His partner had not been with him the night before, and he looked up when Lincoln walked in and immediately saw he had a very tired and haggard face and could tell that Lincoln hadn't slept. And he said, where were you? What on earth happened last night? And so Lincoln shared the ride that he had had over to the Salem Church. He shared about Reverend Akers, and he shared about the message that Reverend Akers had preached. And then he said these prophetic words. He said, I cannot shake from myself the conviction that I shall play a role in ending this tragedy. As a young man, Abraham Lincoln recognized he had been given a calling by God Almighty, and he spent the rest of his lifetime, through ups and downs, failures and setbacks, victories at times, answering that call, and our nation will never forget his role in abolishing that injustice. But what I'd like to do is change the question that Reverend Akers posed and make it a little more applicable to our gathering here in Anchorage, Alaska on February 15th, 2014. Who can tell? But perhaps the woman or man that God may use to bring an end to the injustice and the tragedy of abortion in Alaska, in America, around our world, may be here in this very room today. Is it you? And if it's not you, then who is it? And why aren't they already doing it? It is you. It is here. It is now. Each of us have to recognize that we are called to lead. The second realization that we have to have, number two, I can lead. Go back to the hockey game scenario. Picture in your mind. You're getting excited. Repeat after me, please. I can lead. Okay, one more time with a little more enthusiasm. I can lead. Thank you. You get the award for being the most enthusiastic that time. I appreciate that. I can lead. When you look at somebody like Christopher or Haley, and you look at they're young and they're so on fire for this issue, and they're such great leaders, I look at people like that and they make me sick. Because I am not a natural born leader. I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but I have always struggled with self-image. I have always struggled with, do I really have anything valuable to offer to other people? I'm just becoming totally transparent to you right here. I was the kid when I was growing up in school. I was the last one they ever picked for gym class when they were picking teams. I was the guy they were like, oh, we get stuck with him. Because I was clumsy. I didn't feel good about myself. I was in band. I played the clarinet. I didn't even lead in band. I was second or third clarinet. My dating record showed a dismal lack of leadership. I had one date in high school that I ever asked a girl out on. It was to prom. And yes, at prom, she got back together with her ex-boyfriend. That's the kind of leadership record that I had. So you come into this pro-life movement, and here's something that is controversial, divisive, and I have this innate temperament. I want people to like me. Why on earth did God put me in the pro-life movement? And I first heard about this issue when I was in school, and I became a passive pro-lifer. Well, I don't like abortion, but I don't want to do anything about it. But yet, over time, I came to recognize little bit by little bit, okay, I can take a little baby step here. I can take a little baby step there. And I fast forward to today, and I look at what God has put me in the midst of. 40 Days for Life today is a network of over 1,000 local leaders who collectively have recruited over 600,000 volunteers all across 50 American states and now 21 other countries. I have traveled now to 460 some odd cities, spoken to hundreds of thousands of people. I am on boards of other organizations like Students for Life of America, Abby Johnson's, and Then There Were None. I get asked to go meet with important political leaders and get to meet with heads of ministry and business. And I look at all this and I laugh because that was not what I ever would have imagined. I am not one of these people that just was naturally ready to lead. But I recognize that each of us, step by step, bit by bit, if we just look at the window of opportunity that is before us today, and instead of saying, oh, I've got to go lead an organization of hundreds of thousands of people, if God had told me that way back when, I would have run screaming into a cave, and I would never have come out. But bit by bit, I took a little baby step, usually encouraged by my wife, sometimes the good swift kick in the backside, go, do it, you can do it. But what I want you to know, if you have never had somebody breathe into your ear and into your heart that you can lead, then let me be that person. You, regardless of your past, regardless of your skills or lack thereof, regardless of your sphere of influence, you can lead. This world is starving for your leadership on this critical issue, the defining crisis of our generation. You can lead. And the third and final realization, before we start actually talking about how do we lead others, the third one is, I must lead. This is the last time I'm going to ask you to repeat after me, so please make it worthwhile. Repeat after me, please. I must lead. Wow, that was the best first time you've ever done, so I won't ask you a second time. You must lead. We are facing the greatest crisis of our generation. 57 million brutally killed children. Millions of women wounded. Hundreds of women have been killed from so-called safe and legal abortions. Thousands of families have been torn apart over this divisive crisis of abortion. And we look at just in Alaska in the last reported year, 1,629 Alaskan children died from abortion. 1,629 mothers who have been wounded, some physically, but many more emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. Christopher last night made it much more real when he said, every week, 31 more children perish. These are real children. This is the crisis of our generation. When you look at all of the leading, I used to sell pharmaceuticals, and I sold cardiovascular drugs, blood pressure drugs, cholesterol drugs, and they used to have us go into physicians' offices and tell them, we've got a solution for the number one killer in America. And they said it was cardiovascular disease. But you know what? Abortion ends more lives than cardiovascular disease by far. Abortion ends more lives than cancer, than AIDS, than accidents, than war, than any other cause. This is our greatest crisis. And when history measures you and me in hindsight and looks back on us, we will not be remembered for what great monuments we built to ourselves or our financial wealth or what the stock market did. We will be remembered for how we met our greatest crisis. This is that crisis. We must lead. So whether we're comfortable with it or not, we have to recognize that we are called to lead, that we can lead, and that we must lead. And when we come to that realization, that is when we can begin to influence other people for good. So why is it important to lead others in this pro-life work? Well, I don't know about you, but I can't do it all myself. Imagine, just take 40 Days for Life as the example for a moment. If you're doing a 24-hour-a-day, 40-day vigil outside of an abortion facility, which is what we encourage people to do unless there's a safety issue, that's 960 straight hours of prayer and presence. How many of you can do that by yourself? I can't do that. I do this as my full-time, this is my calling. I can't do that. We need other people to be effective. We cannot do it all ourselves. And whether it's running a political campaign, whether it's running an advocacy campaign, if we can't have others involved, we will burn out. No questions asked. We were talking about it, Rebecca and Dan and I were talking right before I got up to do this session. We go around and we travel and we meet these heads of local Right to Life chapters, or we meet these heads of pregnancy centers. And these people, God bless them, they are on the verge of just giving up because they put it all on their own shoulders. Instead of saying, I can lead other people, I must lead other people, they say, well, I'll just do it myself. It's too hard to ask other people. I'm afraid to ask other people. And so they put it all on themselves and they cannot sustain it for any length of time. How do we multiply our effectiveness? It's not through more time and more efforts. We can only do so much. There's only 24 hours in our day. There's only so much that each of us can do to improve our effectiveness and efficacy in what we do. Once we reach that maximum point, it has to be because we influence other people. So the number one reason that we have to lead others is because you can't do it all yourself. But one of the other reasons that it's vital that we lead others and assemble teams and work with other people is because, frankly, we all have different gifts and talents. One of my favorite passages of Scripture is the body of Christ analogy. All the different parts of the body, the hand and the foot and everything else, and they all make up this one body. I don't know about you, but there are people here in this room who have gifts and talents that I would only dream of having. But you have them. And there are gifts and talents that I have that you may not. And the only way that we can really realize that gift of that body of Christ is by recognizing there are different parts. And we can't be and do everything. Rebecca can do something I can't even come close to imagine doing. Christopher and Haley do things I can't even think of doing. Joe Miller does things. Everybody has their unique gifts. And the reason we have to work with others is so that entire body can be everything it is called to be. I always think about that analogy of the body of Christ, and I realize if you think about the entire body, somebody has to be the backside. And I sometimes think that's me. But we all have our place. We all have our part. In the body of Christ, everybody can and will do something, but we have to work together. We cannot do it alone, and we want to tap into the strengths of the other parts of the body of Christ. Another reason why we want to lead others in this work is because, frankly, it's a whole lot more fun, and it's more effective. Some of my greatest blessings and joys of being involved in the pro-life movement have been seeing other people that I'm working with grow as leaders and watching the victories that God has accomplished through them. I love that. It's so fun to meet people who have gifts and talents. When Bobby Schindler and I happened to be on the same flight coming in from Seattle to Anchorage, and when I saw him in the airport, it was like, here's a friend of mine. Here's somebody, we stand in the trenches, we fight together. When I see Rebecca, when I see Dan, people that I see at meetings in Washington or another, Rebecca and I were at a conference together in Bereit, France in 2012. It's so awesome to have friends everywhere you go and to know that we all can have a great time. Yes, we're dealing with this huge injustice, this critical issue, but we can still be together and be blessed by our involvement with other people. And everybody can work together. And not only that, we can be more effective. When 40 Days for Life began, let me give you an example of this. There were 4 of us who prayed for an hour and had essentially this clarion call that became 40 Days for Life. Now, originally, we only thought it was for one community. But we finished the hour of prayer and realized that we had to have 24-hour-a-day prayer coverage outside of the abortion center for 40 days. As I mentioned a moment ago, that's 960 hours. How long do you think it took us to fill every one of those hours with somebody who was committed to be out there? Take a guess. Somebody take a guess. A month. Close. It was 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Here's why. There were 4 of us sitting around the table, right? There's 24 hours in the day. Divide 24 hours by 4, you have 6 hours per day that each person committed to. And each of the 4 of us said, if no one else is out there, I will be there. I couldn't have done that myself, but the 4 of us together could. And then we were able to go out and find other people so that we didn't have to be out there 6 hours a day. But when you have others on a team, you can be so much more effective and accomplish so much more. And then that team can recruit and fill in those gaps so that it doesn't all even just fall on the leadership team, but that it begins to multiply itself. So that's why we have to lead others. So in your pro-life efforts, whether it's a pregnancy center, whether it's a 40 Days for Life campaign, whether it's a local chapter of Alaska Right to Life, it's vital that you have a team of people that are all involved in the leadership, because that way it does not all fall on you. I always think about this, is my organization, my pro-life work in a place that if I got hit by a renegade moose outside of this event today, 40 Days for Life would still continue. And if not, shame on me. We have to make sure that our efforts, if they are as important as we say, they must not be dependent upon just us and just our personality. So we have to put together a team of people to bring those different strengths and gifts, to have fun and fellowship, but also to be more effective. We have to put a team of people together. So how do we start? You see, I've never led anything before, David. I don't even want to be a leader, but you told me that I must lead, so I guess I have to. Where do we start? Well, we look around us. Henry Blackaby, a number of years ago, wrote a book called Experiencing God. And in that book, he talks about many times to discover God's will in our life, we just have to look around us at where God is moving and then join him in that work. That's how we can experience him and be a part of his will. Well, in the same way, there are people right now in your life that you are meant to invite to be a part of your efforts. They're already there. You don't have to go put an ad in the newspaper. You don't have to go stand on a street corner and recruit people. Look around you in your life and say, who are my friends? Who are my family members? Who are people I know? And just come up with, what I do is I get a sheet of paper. Do you remember that paper, the dead trees? We no longer have to use electronic devices for everything. Get a sheet of paper and a pen and brainstorm, who do I know that has a passion for this cause, or at least they won't chastise me if I bring this issue up to them. Write them down. Those are prospective leaders to be on your team. Now, when you brainstorm and you pray about it, think about, another thing is keep that piece of paper with you for a few weeks. And when you're out and about, when you go to the laundromat or when you go to church, look around you and say, who can I add to that list? Write them down. And then pray over that list. Now, you may start to narrow it down because you don't want to invite everybody you know to be a potential leader. You have to be very discerning in who's going to be your core team, who's going to be your group, who's going to be so close that we are going to go, basically, we're going to go charge the gates of hell together. Who do I want those people to be? And so as you take that list that you brainstorm and think about, then you start to narrow it down prayerfully, discerningly, and say, who do I really want to not only get to spend more time around, but who do I think would have my back and I'd be willing to have their back in the midst of this contentious struggle? And those are the people that you want to narrow your list down to. So then it comes to contacting them. Now, we live in this social media society where we think that everything is done by making a post on Facebook or making a tweet. Those are great and they have their place, but nothing in the world replaces in-person communication. I have never asked somebody to be a part of a leadership team other than face-to-face or on the telephone, ever. And it's a lost art. How many of us, does anybody ever still write a handwritten note to anybody anymore? It's amazing. When you do that and people say, oh my gosh, I forgot that people know how to write. It's truly incredible how much we are starving in this so connected world. We are starving for real human interaction and real relationships. And you can do that by contacting these people. And what I would suggest is rather than doing a broadcast email or rather than simply calling them and just trying to recruit them over the phone, get together. If you're a coffee drinker like I am, everything revolves around caffeine for me. That's how we're able to do 40 Days for Life, 24 hours a day. That's the one thing I've never fasted from during a 40 days. So if you're ever wondering. But get together over a cup of coffee and sit down with the person. And whatever it is, if you feel led to be a part of a 40 Days for Life campaign in Anchorage or one of the other ones, Catch a Can or wherever, if you want to do something in Sitka, you're trying to recruit people to get involved in the effort to get Planned Parenthood out of the school systems, pray through what it is how God moved your heart to be involved in that effort and get together with that person and share your heart. Rebecca talked about the importance of a personal story. Nothing moves people's hearts. You can pull out all the statistics, all the research studies in the world. That's great. That helps to bolster a case. But ultimately, it comes down to, why are you passionate about this? Why am I committed to do something, and why am I asking you? Share your heart with people, and many times that will help. And then also, whatever the project that you're doing, cast the vision. What could this become? And then don't be afraid to ask people to be a part of that vision. If you're going to do a 40 Days for Life campaign, there was a girl named Devaney Cooper in Memphis, Tennessee. She heard about 40 Days for Life. She had a few challenges going against her. She was a homeschooled high school student. She didn't have a driver's license, and she was 18. So, of course, naturally, the world would say that is the leader of a pro-life effort in that city. But she heard about 40 Days for Life, and she said, well, I think it should be done here. There's a Planned Parenthood that's in a big office building in downtown Memphis, and last year their annual report showed that 2,000 children died there. Doggone it, we need to do something. So she started going and talking to the pro-life experts in town saying, you should do this. And they said, oh, we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't. They were too busy, they had other projects, maybe legitimate reasons. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Devaney had to decide, is this vision enough that she's willing to take the lead and then invite other people to be a part of her vision? So Devaney began to cast the vision to other people, most of them older than her. Her mom agreed to drive her around to her meetings, but she began to share with them what could happen. What could God do through our efforts? And as she shared that vision, she assembled around her a leadership team. So she had to recognize that she was called to lead, that she could lead, that she must lead, even though she didn't think she could. And then she had to begin to assemble other people. Most of them had gifts and talents she didn't have. So she assembled that team to make up for her, what she perceived as her deficiencies. So as that team came together and they started to plan their 40 Days for Life, it started to get really exciting. They started to spread the word. They started to tell everybody about what was going to happen. And people started to sign up and get ready for the campaign. And as it was being spread around publicly that there was going to be this 40 Days for Life outside of this office building where Planned Parenthood was in downtown Memphis, the owner of the office building sent a nastygram to Devaney. He said, I just wanted to let you know there are other standalone abortion facilities in Memphis. Mine is in a prestigious office building in downtown Memphis. And if you hold this outside of my building, my other clients will be financially affected by this. And therefore, if you don't cease and desist with your plans to do this 40 Days for Life, then I will sue you. I'll sue 40 Days for Life. I'll sue anybody I can. So Devaney calls me up. She says, David, we got a vision for a campaign. My team is now totally invested in this vision. What do we do? Well, the first thing I did is I called my good friend Tom Brecka, the Thomas More Law Society. He's an incredible attorney, has argued pro-life cases before the U.S. Supreme Court 3 times and won on behalf of pro-life advocates. And Tom got on the phone with me and then with Devaney and her team, and we all prayed for a few minutes, and Tom was so fired up. He's like, you've got to stand for free speech. Don't let them silence you. Don't back down. And I'm sitting here thinking, if I was in Devaney's shoes, I'd back down. I mean, it's just too overwhelming. So Tom gets off the phone, and I said to Devaney and her team, what are you going to do? And they said, we got a vision. And clearly, what we are doing is already having an effect. He wouldn't be sending us this nasty note if he wasn't scared about the effect this would have on his financial situation and also on the abortion business. So they moved forward, and they decided we're going to do it. And they got ready 2 days before their campaign. The guy followed through on his promise. He sued Devaney, he sued her team, and he sued us at 40 Days for Life. And so things started heating up, but the campaign kicked off. They had over 450 people participate in that campaign because Devaney recognized her role to lead because she assembled a team around her to make up for her deficiencies. They got that team together. They were courageous. They pressed forward, and the legal battle was heating up behind the scenes. So it was about day 35 that I thought, I've got to go in there. They're about to go to court. We've got to just rally our troops, but also call upon this building owner back down on his lawsuit. And so I flew out to Memphis, and I rent my car, and I'm driving out to the business outside of which Planned Parenthood's inside on the 3rd floor of this office building, and my phone rings, and it's Tom Brecka. It says, David, I got some good news for you. I called and politely explained to the attorneys on the other side that I had argued cases like this many times and before the Supreme Court and won on those occasions. And I also explained that we were doing all this legal work for you and for Devaney for free, and that they would be spending thousands upon thousands of dollars for their legal help, but if they wanted to, bring it on. He said, amazingly, within 5 minutes, they called the business owner. He called back. They're dropping the lawsuit. It's off. We've won. So when we got there, I got out to tell Devaney and her team, and they were so excited because they thought we're in for a battle, but they were so excited. Instead of a press conference we were planning to have, we turned it into a rally to just celebrate what was happening. But 2 good things happened because Devaney led and because she recruited a team. Number one, 5 lives were saved during that campaign. 5 babies that would not have been saved had it not been for their willingness to press forward. And since then, they've had over 30 lives saved in other Memphis 40 Days for Life campaigns. But the second one, and this is just beautiful. The next time the Planned Parenthood lease came up for renewal at the office building, the owner of the building just said, you know what, this is just not worth all the trouble for me. And he canceled their lease and kicked them out of the building. So all because somebody led and because somebody put a team together to lead. So cast the vision. When you meet with people and you're inviting them to join you in your pro-life efforts and you're casting the vision and you're sharing your heart with them, the last thing I want to be very clear that you need to do is don't be afraid to ask them for something specific and something big. One of the things our world is lacking right now is people feeling like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. There's a wonderful book that was shared with me by the head of the Leadership Institute in Washington, D.C., Morton Blackwell, and he gave me a book called Dedication and Leadership. And the book is by the former head of the Communist Party in England. And during the rise of communism, he was the head in the UK for communism, and all of a sudden he shocked the world by not only denouncing and leaving communism, but by becoming a Christian. So it was completely shocking, and so churches began to ask him to come and speak on, wow, how did this happen? And in the midst of that, he began to challenge the church. He said, when I was involved in the Communist Party, what we used to do, particularly with young people, is we would challenge them to do things they never thought possible for a cause that they thought was bigger than themselves, and they responded to that challenge. And he said, here you are in the Church of Jesus Christ with the singular most important message in the world, and how much are you challenging people to live out the gospel? He said, and for most of us, the biggest request we get from churches, can you help move the chairs around after church? Or can you hand out bulletins? Or could you be a little greeter as people come in and make them feel welcome? What is that? And his whole point was we need to invite people to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And we need to be very specific about what that is as we assemble a team. So I mentioned that we had 4 people. We had all of our hours covered. But as we began to assemble a team for that first 40 Days for Life, we began to ask those people to commit. Now, how much easier is it for me to ask somebody to be out there 1 or 2 hours a day if I'm committed that I'm willing to be out there 6 hours a day? Always ask people to do less than you are willing to do yourself, and always challenge them to do more than they think they can do themselves. And when you ask them that, and they can see in your eyes, to be honest, if you ask somebody to do something so you don't have to, or you ask somebody to do something you're not willing to, the windows of the eyes to the soul, they'll know it. Whether you say it or not, they'll know it. So ask people to do things that you're willing to do, and they will be driven and responsive to doing that. Whenever we recruit people for 40 Days for Life, just to give you a broad example of this, I go around to campaigns. I've been to hundreds and hundreds of 40 Days for Life campaigns. And inevitably, the leaders come up to me and say, we have such a hard time filling slots because we need to get 960 people, or if they're only out there 12 hours a day, 480 people. I said, that's ridiculous. You don't need 480 people. We did it with 4 initially, and then we built from there. But I said, what are you asking people? And they said, well, we asked, would you be willing to come out for an hour and pray outside of the Planned Parenthood Abortion Center in Anchorage during the 40 days? I said, there's your problem. Now, you're specific. That's good. But what kind of commitment is that? 1 hour over 40 days? We're saying this is the Holocaust of our generation. We're saying children are dying there, women are being wounded, and I don't want to bother you, but could you maybe put 60 minutes into this? It just doesn't connect. Our actions don't relate to our words. So what I always do is I challenge people to be out there 1 hour a day, every day for 40 days. And the way I build the case for this is I say to them, how many of us have ever worked a job at least 40 hours a week? And most people raise their hands. Or students, how many of you study and go to class at least 40 hours a week, at least pretend you do so your parents feel that they're getting a return on their investment, and you see the hands raised. But we put in 40 hours or more a week as parents, as employees, for things that get a paycheck or that help to raise our family, all valid, very important things. But we're willing to do that in a week. And I'm saying spread that level of commitment out over more than a month, and God could use you to save a life. I mean, how many people other than a physician or a person in an ambulance rescuing people on the side of the road, how many of us have a chance to save lives, but literally an hour a day for 40 days, God could use you to save a life, maybe even to impact eternal souls. Now, inevitably, if I ask people to do an hour a day for 40 days, how many of you recognize realistically, not everybody's going to do that? But you know what? If you ask for something big and specific and they fall down and do less than that, you're still further ahead than if you'd ask them for only 1 hour during the 40 days, right? They may do 1 hour a week or 1 hour every other day. They will inevitably do more than if you start by asking them for the least possible commitment. So when you assemble a team of people and you've cast your vision, you've asked them for specific roles that they can do, then the next thing I'm going to tell you is you as a team have to build a bond of relationship and fellowship, and you have to commit to one another, and you have to be accountable. Whenever somebody's thinking of doing a 40 days for life, one of the things I will always tell them is, are you willing to clear most of the things off of your calendar beyond your family and work commitments for this period of time, because it's going to take a lot out of you. And if they're not, God bless you, I wish you well in what you're doing, but I need to have some people who will universally, we will commit to one another, that we will prioritize and make this a commitment because the stakes are so high. Why wouldn't we make that kind of a commitment to one another? So we can take things off. There are things, I was here yesterday while my wife was at home. I would much rather have been with her on Valentine's Day than all of you. I mean, you're great folks, don't get me wrong. But we have something that's bigger than those conveniences. And my wife and I have an understanding there are times we will sacrifice certain things for a bigger cause. And believe me, I'm going to make up for it when I get home. But that's the thing we have to recognize. There are times where we will put aside some of the less important things for the most important things. We have to prioritize and we have to commit. And then the final step as you put a team together is you have to assign each other roles. What will you do? What will you do? What will I do? What will we each do so that it synergizes together? The different parts of the body are clearly identified so that they can all work together as a body. So to give you an example of this, 40 Days for Life, what we recommend to somebody, if they sign up to do a campaign, there's somebody who's going to be the campaign director. They're going to lead that campaign locally. And ultimately, they're the ones, the captain of the ship. They're the ones who are going to make it happen. But they need a team around them of other people. And the different roles that we recommend, and it will take on a little different flavor in different places, but we recognize that after that campaign director, since prayer and faith are at the foundation of everything we do, we recommend that they have a prayer director or prayer coordinator, whatever they want to call it. But somebody whose entire role is to, number one, make sure that they are praying, number two, to make sure that the team prays together, and number three, that they instill prayer in everything they do. When you have somebody with that singular focus of prayer, do you think it gets done more than if you have one person spinning 50 plates? Guess which plate inevitably topples and falls over? Prayer. Oh, we're too busy to pray. Was it Bill Hybels, I think, who wrote the book, Too Busy Not to Pray? And that's something we need to recognize. If prayer is central to what we do, is there somebody on your team? That's their role. And if not, get somebody on your team for that. A very prayerful person, somebody who's got a great walk with the Lord, somebody who loves to pray. And they may not be the out front person who's going to do interviews with the media. Great, put them in the prayer role. Intercessory prayer is incredibly powerful. The second aspect of 40 Days for Life is made up of a 40-day vigil outside of a Planned Parenthood or an abortion center. And so we recommend that you have a vigil coordinator. What is that person's role? Their role is only to make sure that people are out there every hour of the 40 Days for Life vigil. Now, they can be very strategic, and different communities have approached this in different ways. Sometimes that vigil coordinator will pick somebody, they'll call them day captains, and they'll have somebody that their job that they recruit for their little team within a team is to be a day captain, that every Monday, that person is going to make sure there are people out there on Monday. And then they have a day captain for Tuesday, and every Tuesday, they're going to make sure. There are some campaigns that instead have said, well, we're going to approach it differently. We're going to have churches take days. And so they'll say, okay, this church over here, First Baptist, you're going to be the first Tuesday. You're going to be the third Thursday, whatever it is. Try to get them to do it once a week. And if they don't, do it one time during the campaign. But then what they need within that church congregation is they need a church captain. So you may say to yourself, well, I'm thinking of doing an effort. I want to involve churches. Start in your church. Maybe you could be a church captain for that effort. Or maybe you could recruit somebody in your church or in another church. And if you start recruiting people to do that, give them a singular focus on that job, and it will be a whole lot more likely that that job will get done. So the vigil coordinator, their whole job, fill the vigil. Another component of 40 Days for Life is outreach. Because if we don't, I'll put it in the context of our convention here today. If all of us walk out of this church and we don't talk to people differently, if we don't initiate conversations, if we don't reach out with what we've been empowered with, this convention failed. It's all about what we take and we spread from here. It's outreach. I shared last night, the most powerful form of advertising in the world, word of mouth, spreading the word to others. And that starts with you talking to the person sitting next to you in your pew at church. It starts with you talking to family members who aren't here today. It starts with you talking to people in your neighborhood or in your social circles. It starts by spreading the word to others. And so we recommend that somebody, since 40 Days for Life, a major part of it is outreach, we recognize that somebody should be an outreach coordinator. Their whole job is on how do we spread the word. When we did the first 40 Days for Life, our whole idea was we want every person in our community to understand the crisis of abortion is real, it's here, it's happening, and we want them to be challenged to be a part of the solution. That was our objective. So Sean Carney, who some of you know through 40 Days for Life, Sean had spent a couple of summers selling books door to door with the Southwestern Company. They get college students as interns and they send them out. They put them in a town, put them in a house, and they essentially have to go out straight commission and make money by selling books. And Sean did unbelievably well. He was highly successful at this. He was in New Jersey and Rhode Island. This is an East Texas boy, so it was totally out of his normal comfort zone, but he was really good at it. And so when we were first praying about the first 40 Days for Life, Sean said, you know what? I bet with a team of 5 or 6 college students, we could take our whole town. There were about 35,000 permanent households plus the college campus. He said, I bet we could knock on every door and invite every one of those people to be a part of 40 Days for Life. I thought to myself, there's no way you could do that. But he had done that selling books, and he knew it could be done. So Sean became essentially our outreach coordinator, and he started recruiting these college students, and literally 5 or 6 of them hit every single household in our community. They even knocked on doors of the Planned Parenthood board members and employees. They knocked on the door and talked to the editor of the newspaper and the reporters from the local TV station. When you reach out to everybody, guess what? Your message is going to reach some pretty influential people. Sean tells funny stories. There was a local TV station who got wind of this, and so they thought it would be cool to run around with their TV camera and walk around behind Sean because they wanted to see confrontation. They wanted to see people getting angry at him. And so they were running around with their little camera, and Sean would go knocking on doors. And the day they went, he didn't get a single confrontation. I mean, it was all people like, okay, yeah, I'll pray for an end to abortion. You want me to be a part? Yeah, I'll consider being a part. He knocks on the door of one of the Planned Parenthood employees, TV cameras rolling. And he says, hi, I'm here. My name's Sean Carney. I'm here to ask you, would you be willing to pray for an end to abortion? And this Planned Parenthood employee goes, sure, I guess that sounds like a good idea. And they closed the door. And the TV was like, that's not fair. We wanted confrontation. But amazing things can happen. And who knows, maybe a seed was planted during that time. You never know. So an outreach coordinator. The 2 other roles that we recommend for a local 40 Days for Life campaign. Now, think for a second. Why did I ask Sean to be our outreach coordinator? Because he had done things and had skills that I didn't have. I'm terrified of knocking on a total stranger's door. He wasn't. So guess what? He's the guy I asked to be our outreach coordinator. The next role, communications coordinator. Now, let me pause before I tell you about this role. When we help people set up a 40 Days for Life campaign, the important thing we say is all of these tasks need to be done in all of these roles, but there are times where you may have to wear 2 of these hats at once. There are times where you can't get one person for each of these roles. It's not perfect like that. But as long as you recognize the roles have to be met and you're continually searching for somebody to fulfill those roles, you're going to be a whole lot better off than if you just try to put it all on your own shoulders. So communications coordinator. We recognize that if we're going to ask people to be involved in a 40 Days for Life, they're going to want to know, is this working? What's happening? I'm only out there 1 hour a day, or some people, believe it or not, didn't come out an hour a day, even though I asked them. Maybe they were out there once a week. We wanted them to feel connected, invested, and to take ownership in this effort. And the only way we could do that was through communicating with them. And so we chose early on to use as our primary tool during a 40 days email, because it's very instant. It's a push communication that people will get. And we decided to focus on every day putting out messages with little success stories or little challenges we'd ask people to pray for. And then we'd have a short little devotional and then a passage of scripture and a prayer. And that was our model. And if you've ever followed 40 Days for Life nationally and internationally through email, we still do that to this day. During the 40 days, you get an email every single day. It has a few stories of what God's doing through faithful people. It has a brief devotional, and it has a prayer at the end. And that's the model. And you know what? When we finished the campaign, the first time we did it, I thought, I get inundated with emails. I get hundreds and hundreds of emails a day I don't want. And so I thought people are going to get really upset with us. And we told them, we're going to send you one every day. Is that okay? Yeah, sign me up. When we get to the end of a 40 Days for Life campaign, we have pounded people with email, right? And so we're thinking they're going to be so thankful we're turning it off and throttling it back. Inevitably, within the week or two after a campaign, wherever I travel, people go, please, can you keep sending those every single day? That's my little lifeline to know that what we're doing is making a difference. People want to feel connected. And so if you need to communicate in person, or if you need to communicate to the media, if you need to communicate through social media, have somebody who has a gift in communication do that. And they can be the communication coordinator. And when it comes to the media, we actually, for those who sign up to do a 40 Days for Life, we do an entire session on media training because it's such a poorly implemented skill amongst pro-lifers. So many people do it badly. And I think what Rebecca was talking about earlier, we have to be willing to be articulate. We have to know what to say and, more importantly, what not to say. But we have to be willing to engage and find somebody who does that. When we have a local 40 Days for Life campaign, our recommendation is if a camera shows up at one of your events, you don't just say, talk to anybody you want. You have a designated person who has been schooled and taught how to talk to the media, and you direct everybody. Everybody says, go talk to that person, go talk to that person. They're the ones who are the face for that campaign. And inevitably, as Rebecca also said, it helps if that person is female. It helps if that person is very articulate. But again, if not, you get the best you can do. I've done media interviews for pro-life, and believe it or not, half the babies that are aborted are male, so I take it personally. I'm a guy. I'm going to be involved, and I'm going to be willing to be outspoken on this. So again, find the best person you can, and then have that person serve in a role like a communications coordinator. And then the last role is an event coordinator. That's the last role we recommend for 40 Days for Life campaigns. Why events? I am a huge believer in the power of events. Because when you get people together, there's a synergy, there's a magic that happens that can't happen anywhere else. And so we recommend for our 40 Days for Life local campaigns, we recommend they have a pre-meeting called a Cast the Vision meeting. Then they have a kickoff rally, they have a midpoint rally, and they have a closing celebration, 4 events. Each of them has a very unique and specific purpose, which is beyond the scope of what I want to take time to do right now. But each of them has a reason to draw certain groups of people together to accomplish certain things and to leverage the impact of their campaign. Let me give you an example of the power of events. We had an hour of prayer that gave us this call for 40 Days for Life. Then we put together our little core team beyond the 4 of us that had prayed. And once we did that, we realized we had a big challenge. We had to get people to actually commit. So we weren't out there 6 hours a day, just the 4 of us. So we decided to do 2 meetings. The first one was, we called it Cast the Vision, and that's where that came from. We sent out a note to about 60 of the people who'd been involved in pro-life efforts before, and we said, we've got something big we're going to launch. We really need your help. We're going to tell you about it. We think it's going to be a game changer in our town. Come to our little office. We'll tell you about it. And about 40 of those people came that night. And so we shared this crazy vision of 40 Days for Life and told them all what it was about. And then we shared with them our personal commitment. Some of those people got excited. Now, some of those people also were doubters. There's a guy named Dave Jones. I love Dave. He's a good friend of mine. Dave told me years later, he said, I was there that night. And to be honest with you, at the end, I thought, these guys are so full of smoke. It's not even funny. This will never work. They'll never get people to do it. That's okay. But we put the vision out there, and a few of them caught the vision and got excited. And from there, we decided to do our first kickoff rally. Now, we had never publicly announced that we were going to do a 40 Days for Life or even told people what we were thinking of doing. We sent out a message by email, by phone, church announcement. We just said, we've got a big game changer thing that we're going to do to bring an end to abortion in our community. Come on such and such night at such and such time, be there, and we'll tell you what it is. I love curiosity, too. It gets people a little bit like, okay, I got to go just to find out what's going on. We had about 150 people show up that night. By the end of that event, 80% of our slots of our 24-hour day, 40-day vigil were filled by other people. 80%, because those people got excited. We shared the vision. We told them what was going to happen. We told them about our commitment. We shared our heart. We asked them for specific commitments, and many of them did. So if events are that powerful, even here, if each of us had just been given a book of a whole bunch of articles about what each of the speakers are going to share here, it's nothing like being here in person to meet Rebecca, to hear from Dan, to hear from Bobby Schindler, to hear about sidewalk counseling. There's nothing like that. And so you're here getting encouraged, and then when you leave here, you're different because of it, and that's why events are important. So that's why we recognize that it's important for a 40 Days for Life campaign to have an event coordinator. Now, once you have a team, how many of you want to see your pro-life efforts in Alaska absolutely explode with exponential growth? How many of you would like to see thousands and thousands of more people involved and lots more results, and ultimately know this is all pointing towards the end of all abortions in the state of Alaska? How many of you want to see that happen? Okay. Can I share with you an absolute transformational breakthrough that I discovered years ago that has been instrumental in the growth of 40 Days for Life? It's going to be so simple that you're going to say, how is this a breakthrough? I came from the business world. I'd been in pharmaceutical sales and marketing. And I got involved in pro-life work, had no discernible skills that would be appropriate for pro-life work. I didn't know how to articulate the message. I'd never been involved in leadership. I'd never managed anything. I'd never been involved in nonprofit work. And so when I'm suddenly thrust into this role of leading a pro-life effort, I had to recognize I had to draw on whatever experiences I had and just bring them with me. And my experiences came from the business world. So I started studying business, various different business practices, success practices from other industries. I looked at social movements that have been successful. And I said, what if I could distill this down? Give me a simple recipe, like basically how to bake a cake. Give me a few steps. And if I can focus on those things, I can do that, but don't make it complex. And ultimately, I spent over a year, and I spent over $30,000 investing in consultants and training and everything else, all to come up with what I'm about to show you. You're about to get $30,000 worth of advice for free here. That's it. Congratulations. Did you get your money's worth out of the conference? There you go, $30,000. Now let me explain what this is. Attract, connect, direct. There are 3 activities if we want to see our pro-life efforts grow that we need to be focused on like a laser at all times. And these are the 3 that, for me, have been instrumental in taking 40 Days for Life in 6 years from 4 people to 600,000 people, from 1 campaign to thousands of campaigns and tremendous results. It's been these 3 things, and again, undergirded by a faith in God and the Holy Spirit's move. Let me never underestimate the importance of that. Attract. What do I mean by that? If it's just us, and we, even as a team, never attract anybody else, it's all going to fall on our shoulders. It's going to be too hard. Even if you have a 40 Days for Life team that I just described, and that's it, and it stops there, it's just too much. And they may be able to pull off 1 or 2 campaigns, but eventually they're going to say, I can't do this all. All the hours that need to be covered, all the churches that need to be reached out to, all the media interviews, I can't do it all. That's why it's important to continually work to attract people. Because if it's just you, not a lot's going to get done. So every day, I was sharing with Dan and Rebecca before this, when 40 Days for Life started, I made a commitment, because I had already discovered this whole process for me, I made a commitment that 50% of my time would be focused on attracting other people to be involved in our efforts. Because if it's all focused on the mechanics of doing the work, then it's never going to grow. But if we can multiply through other people, that is where we start to see this exponential growth. So right now, I still spend about 1/3 of my time focused on attracting other people into 40 Days for Life. Leaders, volunteers, everybody. So if we attract other people, and we'll go through each of these in a little bit of detail. If we're attracting other people, the important thing is to recognize that if we're gathering all these people together, it's not enough. I mean, literally, if you want to say, well, I want a database of people, well, let me give you a phone book. There's a database of people. That doesn't mean anything. The next step that is vital and sometimes missing in our pro-life work is to build a connection, to build a relationship with those people. So if you attract people to be a part of your 40 Days for Life, or you attract people to be involved in your effort to get Planned Parenthood out of the schools, or to be involved in your pregnancy center, then they have to know you, they have to like you, they have to trust you before you ever direct them to do something. Before you ask them to go climb a mountain, do they know you? Do they feel like they can trust you? Do they have a relationship with you? So it's vital that we connect with these people and build those relationships, and only then, at the end of that time, can we direct people or give them specific action steps of things they can do to move the ball down the field and ultimately to get it across the end zone. Now, the beautiful thing, and I'll go into these in a bit more depth in a moment, if we are attracting people and we connect with those people, we build a relationship, and then we ask them to do different things, that inevitably will be attractive to other people who will want to join them and you in this work. You will then be connecting with more people who then you can direct to do more things. And that's why instead of it being a linear process where you attract, connect, and direct, it is a cyclical process. And it's actually like a spiral staircase. If you are always working to attract more people, you are always working to build relationships and connect with those people, and you're always giving people things that they can do in your shared goals to move them forward, then that will attract more people, connect with more people, direct more people, and it keeps spiraling upward. And that's how you get, instead of a growth, let's say this is a graph, instead of your pro-life growth looking like this, that's how it goes like this and gets to be exponential. How do we get 300, 400 cities at a time to do a 40 Days for Life campaign? It's because we started with 1, and then a handful, and then 89, and then 200, and then 300 and 400. It starts getting exponential because we're continually attracting, connecting, and directing. And the same thing is going to hold true for you. So let's take each of those points and let's drill down into them with a little bit of depth. And I think this will be, if you get this, it is so simple but so profound. I have this circle in my little office. My office is in a corner of my bedroom. 40 Days for Life doesn't even have an office. It's my wife sometimes says, can we move it at least out into another room and get it out of the corner of our bedroom? But that's where 40 Days for Life's headquarters is, world headquarters. And I have this little picture in my office every day to say, did I do something today to attract other people? And if I didn't, I need to. Did I do something today to build a relationship, to connect with somebody involved in 40 Days for Life? And if I didn't, I need to. Did I do something today to direct other people? And if I didn't, I need to. So I'm always reminding myself that. So what does attract look like? The first thing is, to attract people, you need to do something attractive. That sounds very simple. But think about this. Like I said earlier, people want to be a part of changing something, doing something bigger than themselves. They want to be a part of something heroic. They want to make a difference in the world. They want to know that their time, their effort, their money is a worthwhile investment. And you have to make sure that what pro-life efforts you are involved in are attractive so people will want to be a part. So do something worthwhile. Have a bold vision. Have a goal. Have a plan. Be willing to attract people to something they will want to be a part of. It may stretch them, that's okay, but do something that they will say, I've got to do that. I've got to do that important thing because it's too worthwhile to not do. So first, do something attractive. Now, I always am looking at everything we do and saying, is what we're doing being done in a way that will be attractive to somebody? And part of 40 Days for Life role, we have felt, is drawing new people into the pro-life movement. And so of the 600,000 people who have been a part of 40 Days for Life campaigns, we survey them, and we found that 34% of them have never done a pro-life activity before, ever. So that's over 200,000 people who have gotten involved in pro-life efforts through 40 Days for Life. How? We made it simple, we made it easy, we made it attractive. We made it something that they could say, okay, can I go out and pray? Yeah, I can do that. Can I pray and fast from home? Yeah, I can do that too. Can I spread the word to other people? Yeah, I can do that. We make it a simple, attractive thing, but they also feel like, okay, if I go out there, even if I go out there 1 hour a day for 40 days, the overwhelming majority of 40 Days for Life participants never see a victory in front of their eyes. Never. 600,000 people participate in 40 Days for Life, 8,245 babies saved. So that tells you a lot of people have never seen any evidence that their efforts bore fruit. So what do? We communicate with them and share with them. Here's what happened in Palmer, Alaska. Here's what happened in Fargo, North Dakota. Here's what happened in Metuchen, New Jersey. And they feel like I'm a part of something bigger. So that's part of the attractiveness, is to recognize that they can be a part of something that they recognize is making a difference. The second part of attracting, though, is give people a compelling invitation. You know, we think that just the righteousness of our cause, people should just line up wanting to sign up and be a part of it. I always look at it and say, you know what? I've got to make it. I got to sell them on being involved. Because you know what? Somebody had to sell me on being involved. My wife. I didn't want to go out the first time to an abortion clinic. Are you crazy? But wives are very good at convincing their husband, so she got me out there. But in the same way, how can I compel other people to want to be involved? When I used to recruit people to go out and pray in front of an abortion clinic, one of the craziest, most controversial things you can ask people to do, my entire pitch was not so much about, here's the logistics, here's where you can park, here's where you can stand. Yeah, that's all great. What I did is I shared a story, a personal story. I shared a story of a guy named Pat Caraway. And Pat was an evangelical guy who was involved in pro-life efforts in our town. And Pat one day was standing out in front of the abortion clinic by himself with a sign that simply said, "Thou shalt not kill." And he had his head bowed in prayer. And unbeknownst to Pat, a woman was coming down the road with her turn signal on to go in for her abortion appointment, and she saw Pat's sign. And she saw Pat with his head bowed in prayer. Not judgment, not condemnation. She saw a person there praying. She turned off her turn signal, went down a little bit, did a U-turn, went back up the road, and went to the Christian Pregnancy Center. The only way that Pat Caraway found out he saved a life that day, with God's help, was because that lady told the pregnancy center, "That's why I'm here. That's why I'm choosing life for my baby." So Pat found out that 1 hour of his time saved a life. And I would ask people, how many of you have this past week had a single hour that helped to save a life? You have an opportunity. Perhaps God can do that through you. Is that a lot more compelling than saying, don't you know, children are dying, we need to be out there, it's our Christian duty, we need to go stand at the gates of hell? I mean, is that true? Yes, but we need to make the invitation compelling. So first, do a worthwhile, attractive thing. Secondly, on that aspect of attracting is give a compelling information, give a compelling invitation. And the third thing, and this is where a lot of people miss the boat too, is capture their contact information. If they come to your event, if they come to your dinner, if they come out to pray for an hour, do you have a way that you can get back in touch with them and begin to build that relationship? I travel all over the place and I see a lot of pro-life groups. And when I look, before I go into any pro-life group, I look at their website, and almost every one of them misses this most important thing. The most important element on any pro-life organization's website is the little form that asks people to give their name and email address. Hands down. 40 Days for Life, we are able to directly communicate with 120,000 people and then through them to over 600,000 people because we give people a compelling reason to want to sign up for information from us. How powerful is that? Most people go to a website, look and go, that's great, and then they go off and do 100 other things, they never come back. But we have to find a way to capture their information in a positive way, invite them to share their information so that we can then begin to connect with them and communicate with them and build a relationship. So if you are doing something worthwhile, you're inviting people, then you have to have a way. Maybe it's just to sign up on a piece of paper to be a part of a 40 Days for Life campaign. Maybe it's to simply fill out a little spreadsheet where you put their name and contact information. Maybe it's their phone number because you're more connected in the local community. But have a way that you can gather people's information so then you can move to the next stage of the process, which is to connect with people. So you've attracted people, now it's time to connect. Connecting is all about relationships. And you build those relationships as you begin to communicate with those people that you attracted during the first step. And the way you build those relationships is frankly by making time and making a commitment to be there for those other people. Do you know the people involved in your pro-life efforts, kids' names? Do you know their spouse? Do you know their interests? Or is it all so focused on our pro-life thing that we don't know any of that stuff? I want to know each of them personally. They're people, if they're willing to go climb this mountain with me, they're my friends. And I want to know them just as much as I know people that are part of my wife and I's couple group or whatever else we're a part of. So get to know those people, because as you build those relationships, and more often than not, that's more of us listening and less talking as we ask questions and get to know those people, that is when they will begin to trust you and I as we build those relationships, as we continue to reach out. I shared with you last night, for those of you who were at the Valentine's dinner, the guy who shared the idea of the 24-hour-a-day vigil, somebody who, unbeknownst to me, had survived an almost abortion when he was a child. We were involved in a marriage preparation program with him. We had a relationship. We trusted one another. He later told me, this is amazing, the idea that he presented to me of what if we were out there 24 hours a day praying outside the abortion facility, he had shared with a number of other people before me, and they had all laughed at him. They'd all said, that would never work. That's crazy. But he shared it with me. I trusted him. He trusted me. We decided to do it. Look what God has done. So relationships and trust are the first step of connecting with people. The other aspect of connecting is realizing that it is a two-way street. It's a communication back and forth. It's not just you talking at them, but it's you talking and you listening. Now, that can be in person, certainly, at events. And we always tell people, for example, when I recruit somebody to go out and pray at a 40 Days for Life for the first hour, I want to go out and be with them. I want to go get a cup of coffee with them beforehand, say, here's what we're going to experience. We're going to pray together. It's overall going to be very uneventful, most likely. And then we go out there together. We're going to be together. And we're going to have a conversation afterwards. Well, how'd you feel? What did you think went well? What challenged you? And then invite them to come back. But we build those relationships through two-way communication. And even if you're using electronic means to communicate with people, for the first year and a half of 40 Days for Life as a national and starting to spread into an international effort, I answered every single email that people sent me that wasn't just a junk spam message. Every one. I was up sometimes, our family would be traveling, we'd pull into a town at 1 a.m, would have to be out at a vigil at 7 the next morning, and I would spend 3 hours answering hundreds of emails. Because if I'm going to ask people to go climb this mountain, I need to be in relationship with them. And I need to listen to them, I need to communicate back with them, we need to build that dialogue. I'm still dear friends with some of those people that I only communicated with by email, and I meet them 3-4 years later, and they say, I feel like I've known you forever. And in a way, we did. So are we available to have that two-way relationship, that communication? And the last aspect of connecting, and this is so vitally important, is truly, truly care. Care about those people. These are not just numbers in seats. These are not just slots filled in a vigil. These are not just votes on election day. These are real people who have real issues, real concerns, real loves, real passions, real fears. And we have to always look at everything we do and say, what's in it for you? Why would you be involved in 40 Days for Life? Why would you be involved in voting for this person for office versus that person? Why would you be willing, like Rebecca, to come up here and share a story that most people wouldn't, even if they had lived and experienced what she had experienced, would never be willing to do it? What's in it for them? Why would people be willing to do these things and constantly focus on them? And if you're focused on them and their hopes and their dreams and their desires, and that ties into your hopes and your dreams and your desires together, you will be able to see unbelievable results as you connect. The third and final step, and then I'm going to wrap all this up with a bow here in just a minute, but the third and final step is to direct. And here's what I want you to recognize. When I say direct, it's essentially give people something they can do, along with you, that together will advance the mission that you and they have been called to answer. It is a blessing to invite other people to stretch and to do things. I am so eternally thankful that my wife and other people in my life invited me to take steps that stretch me way out of my comfort zone to be able to do the work I have done and to experience the amazing blessings I have experienced. I am so thankful people did not deny me the opportunity to be involved in this work. I am so thankful they challenged me to do more than I ever. What is a good coach? On a hockey team and a football team, there's somebody who brings out of their team more than those team members would ever be able to do on their own. And I've had people like that in my life that have stretched me to be more. Don't ever apologize to somebody for asking them to be involved. Don't ever start with saying, well, I really, I don't want to interfere with your busy life. Be proud. We have an opportunity to change the very course of history for God and for good in our world. Don't apologize for that. And don't be afraid to ask people for commitments. Now, I struggle with this, and I give you a personal story of this. When I was about to leave the business world to go into pro-life work full-time, I had this mental struggle with, I'm suddenly going on to other people's charity. So I'm going to run a nonprofit organization. We're going to ask people for donations. We're going to ask people to invest their time. And is that bad for me to ask people to do that? And fortunately, I had an amazing man who was the chairman of the board of that organization who sat me down in his office, and he was an obstetrician gynecologist named Dr. Royal Benson. God rest his soul. He perished very young last year. But Royal sat me down in his office, and he said, David, right over there is my copy machine. He said, that copy machine, he said, do you think I, as a physician, have a clue how to fix it? He said, no, I don't have a clue how to fix it. What I do is I find somebody that's their skills and their gifts, and I hire them to come in and fix my copy machine. I can't do it. He said, I can't right now in my phase of my life go out and do everything needed to end abortion in our community. But you can, and I'm willing to hire you to do that. And I'm challenging you to do that. I'm so thankful he did. But when we ask other people to be involved, recognize we are asking them to be a part of something that they want to be a part of and that they alone can't do, or they can't do it all. And so together, if we bring more people into this, we will collectively be able to accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish. So never, ever look at inviting people to be a part as a challenge or an obstacle or a negative. It is a blessing. And I have people today, people who led 40 Days for Life campaigns who were terrified, never thought they could do it, never really wanted to do it, and they did it, and they have grown so much, and they've come back and said, David, thank you for not letting me off the hook and saying, you don't have to do it. Thank you for stretching me. And I consider that one of my great blessings of this work. Number 2 in the directing is, again, recognizing, and I kind of covered this earlier, realizing that people do want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And invite people to be a part of changing history. Invite people to be a part of saving lives. Invite people to be a part. I always point people to recognize that one day in the history books, there will be a story of how abortion ended. And will their story be a part of that overarching story? Have any of you been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. ever before? It's very, very compelling. And you go through these different floors and you see as the Holocaust progressed, and you walk through rooms of thousands of shoes that were taken from outside of the gas chambers, and you just say, how could this have happened? But yet you can't escape the parallels from what is happening in this crisis we're dealing with today. But the room that most spoke to me was the last room. And in that last room, it was a wall of heroes. It was pictures of people like Oskar Schindler and others who were willing to sacrifice their comfort, their convenience, risk their very lives to help others in that moment of crisis. And we look at them, and there's a few hundred people there documented on that wall. And inevitably, my thought was, well, where was everybody else? But yet, in the eyes of history, these were the ones who acted when everybody else was just too busy living their lives rather than recognizing the crisis that was plaguing their nation. And in the same way, when abortion ends, when it's marked in the history books that it's ended, there will be somewhere a memorial, there will be a wall of heroes, and our children and our grandchildren are going to be looking for our pictures and our stories. And if they're not there, they're going to have some pointed questions for us. But when they are there, they're going to swell up with pride and say, you know what, Grandma? You know what, Grandpa? I'm so proud of you because you were doing the right thing at that moment of need. And other people want to be a part of making an impact like that. And that's what we invite them to do when we direct them. And then the last piece of direct, again, is I just want to reemphasize specific, clear calls to action. When I ask people to be involved in any pro-life effort, I don't confuse them by asking them to do 23 things at once. One thing at a time. I make the case for that one thing, and then I close the deal by asking them, can I count on you? Will you do this? So be very specific, be very direct, ask, and then wait for them to respond. And if they say no, don't consider it's not a no forever, it's just not now. And maybe I can reach out with another activity or another request or another opportunity, or maybe just give them time. How many of us did not respond the first time we were asked to be involved in pro-life efforts? I'm one of those people. I'm thankful that people kept asking me, and they kept asking me, and we need to do the same. So if you can get this attract, connect, and direct, I think it will make a tremendous difference. And let me just end by one case study that wraps all this up together. When Planned Parenthood opened its abortion facility in Bryan College Station, Texas, in 1998 they announced it. It opened in 1999. A group of people got together and formed a group called the Coalition for Life. And that was a group to try to respond, initially to try to prevent that abortion center from opening, but that failed. So then it shifted into how do we try to close it down? And over time, things worked and things didn't work. Over time, it went up and went down. But finally, it all began to gel when a group of us got together and said, you know what? We need to really work on all these things I've just talked to you about. We need to have the vision and mission clear in our head of what we want to do. We need to recognize that I'm called to lead. I can lead. I must lead. We need to build a team of other people. We need to attract people in our efforts. We need to connect to them. We need to direct. And we need to undergird all of that with a spiritual foundation. And that community made every mistake known to man, did everything wrong, but that was the community that birthed 40 Days for Life. That was the community where Abby Johnson eventually had her change of heart, her conversion. And that's the community where on August 1st of this year, after 15 years of people in that community doing all the things I've just shared with you, got to celebrate and watch as that abortion facility closed its doors for the very last time. It can happen. It will happen. But we have to recognize that with God's help, we are the ones that He has tasked with doing that. And when we do that, we truly will be a part of ending abortion in our communities, ending abortion in our states, saving lives, changing hearts and minds, bringing healing to the wounded, but ultimately impacting eternal souls, because we are a part of kingdom building work, not just community building work. So let's do those things together. Let's press forward. Let's recognize that we are leaders and let's lead. Let's invite other people. Let's connect, attract, direct. Let's do all the things that we've learned today. Let's put this into action. And truly, I believe that will mark for you and for your community the beginning of the end of abortion. So with that, I will end. And I don't know if we have a minute or two for any questions here. Okay, so Haley says we have a minute for any questions.
Great talk. I appreciate it a whole lot.
Thank you.
Can you explain how you interact with and how you engage and how you attract, connect, and direct churches and church leaders and pastors specifically to engage?
Excellent question. It's a very important part because I personally believe the end of abortion will be directly connected to the involvement of the Church of Jesus Christ. And it may be various different branches and denominations and faith traditions, but we were just talking about that this morning over a cup of coffee. Dan and I were. I have always had this philosophy. We may not always see eye to eye on theology, but this is something we can stand arm in arm, united in our commitment on. And so, first off, never ever shy away from asking members of the clergy, people in churches to be involved. And it's like I was talking about before, share with them the big picture, share your heart, share your passion, share your testimony. I would love to get Rebecca in front of every pastor who tells me why they're not involved in pro-life efforts. I think that would be a pretty compelling case. But if she can't go, can I give them one of her DVDs? If they have exceptions on why they think, well, abortion is okay in these cases, I'd love to give them Dan Becker's book. If they believe, well, yeah, we got to work on life at the beginning of life, but at the end of life, that's a different story. Well, I want to get Bobby Schindler in there. But if I can't, I'm going to get Bobby's message in there. So I always try to think about what is it that is a hang up for them? Where's the obstacle? And I want to build a relationship. I also recognize that for some, these are pastors, are members of the clergy. I know this is going to come as a shock to you. They're human. And they have all the same weaknesses, all the same failings that all of us do. And as reticent as I was to first get involved in the pro-life movement, I recognize that some of them are as well. My dad, I was raised initially in the Presbyterian Church USA, and my dad was a Presbyterian pastor. And I one time asked him, because Presbyterian Church USA is a denomination that hires and fires the pastor at the local level. So the local congregation makes the decision about who's going to be our pastor. And I said, how hard is it to preach on tough topics when you're talking to the people who could fire you if they don't like what you say? And he said, it's really hard. It is really hard. And so they're always thinking about that. And even in churches where the clergy are appointed from the denomination or like the Catholic hierarchy, they want people in the pews to like them. They want to build a relationship, and sometimes they're scared. So a few things that I always keep in mind. Number one is the churches where I see vibrant, dynamic growth, a lot of them are the ones who are courageous and willing to engage. And so many of these pastors are worried about, well, I'll run people off. But what we have to understand is the truth is what sets us free. And the truth is attractive. Holiness. I was with Matthew Kelly, who's a Catholic speaker, last weekend in Florida. And one of the things he said, holiness is the most attractive thing in the world. And living out our holiness through our pro-life effort, that attracts people. And so understand that being bold, courageous, but being winsome and loving in the way we do it is very attractive and can actually lead to church growth. But another thing is to realize that sometimes they just need time, and we just need to have, the connecting part may take a lot of time. There was a Baptist pastor involved. When we got our local efforts started in College Station, we had very quick uptake from the Catholic Church. And the Catholics were very committed, and they've been on the forefront of the pro-life movement ever since it began. And so we went to our Catholic parishes first and made the pitch to get them involved in the prayer efforts outside of the abortion facility. And it went really well. But the challenge was then going to my fellow Protestant brothers and sisters and saying, hey, can you come out? So I went to go meet with the pastor of the largest Baptist church in our town, a guy named Chris Osborne. I love Chris. And I was going to sell him on getting involved in this effort to be out and pray outside the abortion facility. So I had my whole pitch down. I was ready to go. So I went into his office and I walked in, and he walked behind me and closed the door, which is always either good or bad. You don't know. He says, sit down. I said, okay. He said, whatever you're here to ask me to do today for pro-life, I'm in. I'll do it. And my congregation will do it. Now, I wish I could tell you every church meeting I've ever had went that way. That was the only time ever. But he looked at me in the eye and he said, David, the reason that we're in is because I drive every day on the way to church, to my office. I drive by the abortion center. And every time I drive by, there are people, a few of them praying out there, and every one of them is holding a rosary. And I know those aren't my people. And I know that our congregation has not been doing our share. And God's really convicted my heart that it's our time to step up and do our part. And so the Holy Spirit, combined with the time and the relationship, allowed him to come to that realization. That next Sunday, Chris got up in front of his congregation and he said, I want you to go out and pray. This coming Wednesday was the day they chose, to go out and pray at the abortion facility, but I'm not going to ask you to do something I'm not willing to do, so join me out there on the sidewalk. And a few dozen did. Out of a congregation of thousands, only a few dozen went out. But Chris led by example, and that spoke so profoundly. So then, once that happened, guess what? I went to some of his colleagues and I said, let me tell you this amazing story about what Chris Osborne did. And that moved some of them to take a step. But it takes time. It takes years sometimes to get people involved in these efforts. And my last thought on that, because this is such a critical issue for all of us who work with churches, when we had the celebration in Bryan College Station of the closure of the Planned Parenthood abortion facility, we asked a Lutheran pastor to do the opening prayer. And he's a great guy. He's been involved in pro-life efforts there for years. Reverend Don Casper. And Pastor Casper gets up, and he, right before doing the prayer, and we had a very tight schedule, he said, before I pray, I have just a few things to say, which is always one of the, if you're an event planner, you cringe. He said, I'm here to ask today to publicly confess my sin. He said, I've been involved in the pro-life efforts here, but kind of half-heartedly for years, because he said, to be honest, I never believed I would see this day of this abortion center closing down. He said, I ask God and I ask all of you to forgive me for my sin of unbelief. And how profound that spoke to me, that even somebody who was involved still didn't believe. And so in everything we do, we have to continue to share that belief with others, and some of them will come along and others will over time. So thank you for asking. Sure. Go ahead, Rebecca, and then we'll go over here. We'll get both of those. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And a lot of that is just using good judgment and discernment. One of the things, too, we tell our local 40 Days for Life leaders is if you're going to go, let's say you're a Catholic, and you're going to go talk to a Methodist pastor, if you know somebody who's Methodist, bring them along with you. Because you're going to talk in a way that they're going to quickly know you're not one of us. You're going to talk about, instead of a sermon, you're going to talk about a homily. You're going to talk about your parish instead of your congregation or your church. And it's going to be really clear really quickly that you're not one of us. The more you can relate to that person, man to man, or like to like in terms of faith traditions, the better off you are with that. The other thing, one other point I wanted to make to answer both of these questions, and then I'll get yours as the last question before we wrap up for lunch, is recognize that sometimes we put so much stock in the pastor without recognizing the church is not just the leader. The church is all of us as the members of the body of Christ. So an example of this, there was a Methodist church, a charismatic Methodist church in our town. It was really an interesting phenomenon. It was beautiful. But I went to meet with the pastor one day, and I was trying to invite him to be a part of 40 Days for Life efforts, and this is going to be great. You could be a part. And he was a really pro-life guy. He preached on it, but he was scared about asking his congregation to go out in front of an abortion clinic. That's pretty controversial. So what he said to me, he said, well, David, we've got this elders board and everything has to be decided by the elders board. And so, I'll bring it up to them next chance we have, but I can't do that. I don't have the authority to do that. So I left and I started thinking, do I just accept that as that's a brick wall, or do I say, how do I get around that somehow? Well, it just so happened that two things occurred. Number one is we knew people in that church. And so our first 40 Days for Life, one of the things we did is we made these bright yellow wristbands, just said 40 Days for Life on them, and we hand them out. We made like 10,000 of them, handed out all around town. And so all of a sudden, the next Sunday, this pastor's looking out, and he's seeing all these bright yellow wristbands and all these people in his church for the activity that he's been afraid to bring up to the church. Now, the other thing is I happen to know one of the people who was on his elders board. He was a physician named Dr. Haywood Robinson, a former abortionist who had a conversion, an amazing guy. Haywood and his wife, Noreen, are African-American, and Haywood is just on fire, charismatic Christian. And so I called Haywood, explained the situation. He said, we just have to know how to work this politically within the church. And we sometimes think the church is so much more noble, and it's got politics too. We've all seen it. So Haywood, what he did is he called his friendly board members. He said, there are going to be some elders that are not going to be in favor of this. So we got to build our relationships. So he called his friendly elders board members, and he called them up and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to invite David in. We're going to have him talk about this. We're going to have Pastor Wood involved. And we've got to all be really quick to say, well, I'm for it, before those on the board who wouldn't support this would speak up. So it was all like totally manufactured. It was great. So all of a sudden, I get a call from Pastor Bruce, who had told me, no, I got to talk to my elders board. And he said, well, amazingly, my elders board brought up this topic, and they'd like to invite you to come in and talk to our elders board. And I said, no kidding. That's amazing. Great. I'd love to come. So I show up that night. And Pastor Bruce says, well, David's come and talk to me about this. It's a very interesting idea. And then my buddy Haywood, Dr. Robinson, says, David's going to talk about this, but let me tell you why I'm passionate. I used to do abortions. Here's what I saw. Here's why my heart's been broken on this. Here's what the Lord wants. He wants us to do everything we can to save every one of these babies. And then boom, I give my little pitch, 5-10 minutes, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden I finish, and one of the board members says, that's the best idea. We got to do that. We got to do that. And so they said it really quickly. And before some of the other members who are cringing and not really looking excited about this, Pastor Bruce says, I think we should do it too. And then that was it. And they voted. They decided to do it. That next Sunday, they invited me to not only come to their church, but literally, Pastor Bruce turns over his entire sermon time to me and Haywood Robinson, and we get up and we preached it. I mean, it was fun. And at the end, they had an altar call for everybody who was going to be a part. 76 people signed up to be a part that next week of the 40 Days for Life campaign because we learned how to work around it. So it's persistence, it's relationships, and give it time, and you can keep breaking through those things. And the last question.
I retired out of the military up here 37 years ago, and I'm a cradle Catholic. My greatest disappointment is the fact that politics, pro-life, are never talked about from the pulpit. And what I told people, and it's all about taxes, and what I used to say is that I don't see the black churches backing away from talking about politics. And what I would say is, when you stand before the Lord, and he asks you, why didn't you speak out from the pulpit? Are you going to say, gee, we didn't want to lose our tax deduction?
Right. You're absolutely right. And that's, again, we just need to continue to stretch and challenge those around us. And in the Catholic circles, this past weekend, I was in Orlando, Florida, and I was with a number of archbishops and bishops and members of the clergy. And I will say there is some real amazing growth and boldness that's coming out of the Catholic circles. And we're certainly seeing that example lived out through Pope Francis and through a lot of other things. In a couple of months in May, I'll be in Rome for the Rome March for Life, which one of the main goals of that is to continue to encourage the Vatican as a whole to be more outspoken on this. And the same with all other church bodies. We just have to recognize that these leaders are human and we need to love them. My own pastor, my wife is Catholic, and so we attend a Catholic parish together in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And my own pastor, when we first got there, I love him dearly. He's an incredible shepherd, but he really didn't address this issue very directly. Even on Respect Life Sunday or Respect Life Month, it was just a very soft, mushy message. But I called up Father Frank Pavone, if any of you know him from Priests for Life, and I said, well, my wife was even more like, how do we encourage him? How do we encourage him? And he said, you know what? Whenever he does even a little bit, he's hearing all the bad from everybody who doesn't like what he said. Encourage him and thank him for what little he does, and then he'll be willing to do a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's been our approach. And now he gives these unbelievable, bold homilies about the sanctity of life, invites people to be a part of 40 Days for Life and other efforts. But it took years of a relationship where he came to know and trust us, but also the encouragement when he did take little baby steps. And we would have loved for him to take a lot more steps faster, but we have to give people time to grow. But don't wait for them. You keep recruiting other people in the meanwhile, and then when they come along, it will only exponentially grow the impact of our efforts. So with that, thank you very much. God bless you. Look forward to seeing many of you in the evening, and enjoy lunch.